Do you remember those 1950s grocery store items? The ones that filled our shelves before anyone knew they'd be banned? Back then, those products felt like progress, bright promises stacked in tin and glass that made life feel modern and safe. But how many of those simpler times were hiding dangers we never saw coming? Red dye. Number 2 was the color of childhood. Bright red candies, fruit punch, and even cake frosting glowed with it. Kids in the 1950s could spot it from across the store, the promise of something sweet and happy. No one questioned what made those reds so vivid, because back then, if it looked exciting, it had to be safe. Or so everyone thought. The dye gave cherry sodas their pop, lollipops their shine, and even some cereals their charm. But years later, scientists studying lab rats found a darker story. Red dye number 2 was linked to cancer. Suddenly, that harmless glow felt like a warning light. Parents panicked, companies reformulated, and shelves changed overnight. For many, it was the first time America realized that progress could have a price. The same foods that had made childhood magical had quietly carried a risk no one could see. Red dye number 2 became a symbol of innocence lost, a color too dangerous to keep. Lead soldered cans were once the height of convenience, sitting proudly on pantry shelves filled with soups, beans, and vegetables. Housewives in the 1950s relied on them for quick dinners, trusting the gleam of the metal and the weight of the can. No one knew that each meal came with a hidden dose of poison. The solder that sealed those cans was made from lead, a heavy metal that slowly seeped into whatever food it touched. Over time, families unknowingly ingested trace amounts that built up in their bodies. Children suffered the most. Fatigue, headaches, and developmental issues doctors struggled to explain. It took years of investigation before the truth surfaced. These ordinary cans were silently toxic. Once the government finally stepped in, the change was swift and absolute. Modern cans switched to safer materials, but the memory lingered. An entire generation raised on food that was convenient, cheap, and quietly dangerous. In the 1950s, DDT was a household name for all the wrong reasons. Farmers, grocers, and even homemakers believed it was a miracle, a chemical that could protect crops from pests and keep fruits looking fresh for weeks. Produce was sprayed, dusted, and even rinsed in it before hitting grocery shelves. Apples gleamed brighter, tomatoes stayed red longer, and no one questioned it. You could not see the danger, and that made it easy to ignore. Decades later, scientists discovered that DDT was more than just a pesticide. It was a poison that lingered in soil, water, and even human tissue. It killed insects, yes, but it also harmed birds, fish, and people. The chemical built up in the environment until its effects could not be denied. The once fresh produce of the 1950s became a warning from history. What we cannot see can still hurt us. When DDT was banned, it marked a turning point in how America thought about safety, trust, and the true cost of convenience. Coca-Cola with real coca extract was one of those open secrets everyone knew but no one mentioned. The original formula, created decades earlier, contained trace amounts of coca leaf, the same plant used to make cocaine. By the 1950s, the company claimed to have removed it, but in some rural bottling plants, the old recipe still found its way into production. It gave the soda a unique kick, a kind of energy that people swore by. No one called it addiction back then. They just said it helped them get through the day. Coca-Cola was more than a drink. It was America's tonic, its pick-me-up, its symbol of modern energy. But once the truth became impossible to ignore, Coca-Cola quietly changed its process for good. What was left was still iconic, but a little less wild, a little more safe. It's funny to think that one of the most innocent brands in American history was once powered by something so forbidden. Formaldehyde-laced milk sounds like something out of a nightmare, but in the early 1950s it was a reality for some families. When refrigeration was expensive and spoilage high, certain dairy producers found a shortcut. Add a touch of formaldehyde, a preservative used for embalming. It kept the milk fresh longer, even in the heat. To the average shopper, this was the golden age of trust. If it came in a bottle with a farm logo, it had to be safe. The idea that something so pure-looking could be chemically tampered with was unthinkable. But greed and convenience always find their way into progress, especially when no one is watching. Consumers never suspected a thing, trusting the white liquid poured into their children's cereal bowls. For years, families drank what they believed was the purest symbol of health, completely unaware of the chemical lurking within. It took illness, lawsuits, and stricter inspections to expose the practice. Once the scandal broke, public trust in the dairy industry took a hit that lasted decades. The lesson was clear: not everything that looks wholesome is. Sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones that seem the most natural. Butter-flavored margarine was a 1950s wonder, spreadable, cheap, and promoted as a heart-healthy alternative to butter. Housewives embraced it as the modern choice, the sign of progress in every kitchen. Its golden color and smooth texture promised indulgence without guilt. It was advertised in bright magazines beside smiling families and spotless kitchens, the perfect picture of American prosperity. Scientists and companies alike told the public it was the smarter fat, a scientific marvel that separated them from the old-fashioned ways of their parents. But science back then cared more about selling innovation than testing its safety. The secret behind its miracle formula was trans fats, the industrial oils hydrogenated to stay solid at room temperature. For decades, Americans slathered their toast and fried their eggs in it, believing they were doing their hearts a favor. Then the studies came, and the truth was hard to swallow. Trans fats were worse than the butter they replaced, clogging arteries and shortening lives. By the time it was banned, it had already shaped the diet of a generation. Butter-flavored margarine was more than a product. It was a lie sold with a smile. Cyclamate artificial sweetener was the dream of every dieter in the 1950s. It promised sweetness without sugar, indulgence without guilt. Early advertisements called it a scientific miracle, the modern answer to cravings. It found its way into sodas, desserts, and even chewing gum. People felt like they were living in the future, where chemistry could fix every flaw of human appetite. Cafes and soda fountains served slim milkshakes, and homemakers stocked their shelves with low-calorie cake mixes, thinking science had finally conquered temptation. But the sweetness came with a bitter aftertaste of trust misplaced. People loved it, especially diabetics who finally had a way to enjoy sweet things again. But by 1969, everything changed. Studies on lab rats linked cyclamate to cancer, and the Food and Drug Administration banned it almost overnight. For a product that had been called the future of flavor, it was a shocking end. The shelves emptied and the world went back to sugar, realizing that sometimes science can promise too much too soon. The ban became one of the earliest examples of America learning that not every innovation is safe, no matter how sweet it seems. Raw milk was once the pride of the American farm, bottled straight from the source and sold in glass jars. People swore it tasted better, richer, creamier, and somehow more real. In the 1950s, it was still common to see it on grocery shelves, untouched by modern processing. But beneath the nostalgia was danger. Without pasteurization, raw milk carried bacteria that caused tuberculosis, salmonella, and other deadly diseases. Rural families, especially in dairy states, considered pasteurization unnecessary city talk. They trusted their cows, their neighbors, and the land itself. Unfortunately, nature is not as kind as nostalgia remembers. It hides danger even in the things we love most. Families believed they were drinking nature's perfect food, not knowing that it sometimes carried the very thing that made them sick. Eventually, stricter food laws swept across the country, forcing dairies to heat-treat every drop before it hit the store. Raw milk became illegal in most states, a symbol of both freedom lost and safety gained. To some, it was government overreach. To others, it was salvation. Either way, the days of milk straight from the cow were gone for good. Hormone-injected super chickens were the pride of post-war America, a marvel of modern science that promised endless meat at low prices. Farmers injected birds with growth hormones to make them plumper and faster growing, cutting costs and feeding more people. Grocery stores proudly advertised bigger, better poultry that could roast in record time. The sight of a massive bird on the dinner table became a badge of success, a symbol that science and progress had conquered hunger. No one questioned why their chicken breasts had doubled in size or why the meat seemed strangely watery when cooked. They were too busy marveling at the miracle of abundance to see the price of tampering with nature. But what looked like progress soon sparked fear. Consumers began to wonder why their chickens looked unnaturally large and cooked down to almost nothing. Reports of hormone imbalances and health risks spread, and regulators stepped in. By the late 1950s, the practice was outlawed, leaving behind a trail of headlines and suspicion. The super chicken promised abundance but delivered anxiety instead. It became another cautionary tale of a century obsessed with faster, cheaper, and bigger, no matter the cost. Prepackaged luncheon meats were a post-war convenience that fit neatly into America's new rhythm: busy days, quick lunches, no waste. Sliced, sealed, and ready to eat, these meats were the modern worker's dream. They filled sandwiches, lunchboxes, and picnic baskets across the nation. What no one realized was that heating them could trigger a dangerous reaction. The nitrates used to preserve their bright pink color produced nitrosamines, chemical compounds linked to cancer. Commercials showed happy families eating these sandwiches in spotless kitchens, while factories quietly churned out meats laced with preservatives no one could pronounce. It was the dawn of the convenience age, when speed and shelf life mattered more than nutrition. And like so many mid-century innovations, it took years before anyone asked what we were actually putting in our bodies. For years, people fried or broiled their sandwiches, unknowingly creating toxins right on their stovetops. Once scientists uncovered the truth, the industry was forced to reformulate, and entire brands vanished overnight. Luncheon meat never quite recovered its innocence. What was once a symbol of post-war efficiency became a reminder that convenience can carry a hidden cost. Canned meats preserved in nitrate salts looked like pure perfection. The color was bright pink, the flavor smoky, and the shelf life impressive. Housewives of the 1950s trusted them completely, serving slices of corned beef, deviled ham, and luncheon loaf without a second thought. It seemed like progress in a can, modern science keeping dinner safe and pretty. But what scientists would later discover about nitrates changed everything. When heated, these salts created nitrosamines, compounds linked to cancer and heart disease. That beautiful pink hue came at a dangerous cost. Even after the first warnings, it took years for consumers to believe that something so familiar could be deadly. People argued it was overblown, calling it just another scare. But soon, the facts became impossible to ignore. Those rosy slices were proof that sometimes color itself can lie. Doctors began warning families that the same food they fed their children could be silently poisoning them. By the time regulations caught up, generations had already grown up on nitrate-packed meat. It was a harsh lesson. Beauty in food can be deadly if you do not ask what makes it shine. What had once been the color of convenience turned into the warning color of caution. Brominated vegetable oil, or BVO, was the secret ingredient that made 1950s fruit sodas look and taste so good. It kept the citrus flavor evenly mixed, preventing that oily layer from rising to the top. The chemistry was clever, the flavor refreshing, and the bright bottles flew off the shelves. For decades, no one questioned what brominated meant. It just sounded scientific, and science meant progress. But studies later revealed the truth. Bromine compounds did not just disappear. They built up in human tissue, especially fat, leading to headaches, memory loss, and nerve issues. It was found in everything from orange soda to sports drinks, hiding behind harmless-sounding labels. Teenagers drank it daily without a clue that it shared a chemical base with flame retardants. When that fact hit the headlines, even the most loyal soda drinkers turned queasy. The same chemical family used in flame retardants was floating in your orange soda. When the public finally learned, it was too late for many. BVO had been in use for over 30 years. The Food and Drug Administration eventually banned it, leaving soda makers scrambling for safer replacements. Still, those who grew up in that era can probably remember the taste: sweet, fizzy, and unknowingly toxic. Saccharine-sweetened soft drinks were the original promise of guilt-free pleasure. The 1950s called them miracle sodas, offering sweetness without sugar, calories, or consequence. Housewives stocked their fridges with shiny cans of Diet Cola, proud to serve something modern and figure-friendly. It seemed like a revolution, proof that science could outsmart nature. But by the late 1960s, lab tests told a different story. Rats given high doses of saccharin developed bladder cancer, and public trust shattered overnight. The reaction was immediate. Panicked consumers poured out bottles, and news anchors warned of poison in your pop. It became the first true food scare of the modern age, and every can of soda turned into a question of faith. People learned that even sweetness, when manufactured, could carry a sting. Though later research softened the panic, the damage was done. The first wave of diet drinks disappeared, leaving behind fear and confusion. People realized that artificial could mean dangerous, and zero-calorie might come with a hidden cost. Saccharine eventually returned under tight regulation, but it never regained the innocent glow it once had. What began as liberation through chemistry ended as a cautionary tale of too much faith in innovation. Tinned fish packed in PCB-laced oil was once considered a healthy, protein-rich option for busy families. Tuna, sardines, and anchovies sat neatly in shiny metal tins, waiting to become quick lunches or midnight snacks. The oil inside kept them moist and flavorful, but it also carried a hidden poison. At the time, convenience was king, and no one thought to question what made those tins last so long on the shelf. Housewives trusted the packaging, the labels, and the smiling faces in the ads that promised ocean-fresh flavor. The irony was cruel. In trying to make food safer from spoilage, manufacturers had filled it with something far worse. Polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, were used in industrial lubricants and electrical equipment. Somehow, they found their way into the oils used for food preservation, contaminating entire batches of canned fish. PCBs did not break down easily. They accumulated in the body, linked to cancers and reproductive harm. At the time, no one had a clue that a simple tuna sandwich could contain a chemical cousin of motor oil. When the scandal finally broke, it rocked the seafood industry and reshaped how food safety was monitored. Factories were overhauled, regulations tightened, and faith in clean eating took a heavy blow. The sea that had fed generations now carried a warning label of its own. Glass baby bottles with lead paint designs were once a symbol of love and care. Parents in the 1950s adored them, decorated with cheerful ducks, rabbits, and pastel-colored animals. They were gifts for baby showers, proudly displayed in kitchen cabinets, tiny keepsakes of innocence. It was the height of the post-war baby boom, and the market was flooded with products that blended charm with modern design. Mothers trusted anything that looked sanitary and cute, assuming regulators had already done the worrying for them. But in truth, safety testing barely existed. Style mattered more than science. The paint used for decoration contained lead, a neurotoxin that accumulates in growing children and causes irreversible brain damage. No one imagined those smiling cartoon faces could poison their babies. For years, infants drank warm milk from bottles that looked wholesome but were dangerously contaminated. By the time regulators banned lead paint, the damage had already reached countless households. Modern parents might shudder at the thought, but those pastel bottles still turn up in antique stores, a haunting reminder that even the cutest products can hide something cruel. Beauty, it turns out, should never come before safety. Asbestos, oven mitts, and hot pads were marketed as indestructible. Advertisements promised they could handle any heat without ever catching fire. Housewives trusted them, pulling casseroles and roasts straight from the oven with confidence. It was the post-war era of atomic age optimism, when scientific materials meant progress and danger felt impossible. The word asbestos was said with pride. It sounded technical, modern, and safe. Nobody imagined that the same mineral used in insulation and factories could turn a kitchen into a slow-motion health hazard. The secret was asbestos, a mineral that could resist flames but released deadly fibers every time it was touched. Each squeeze, each fold, released invisible dust into the air. Over time, those fibers lodged deep in the lungs, leading to mesothelioma and other fatal illnesses decades later. The danger was silent and patient, hiding behind the promise of safety. By the time the truth came out, many who used them daily were already sick. Asbestos was once hailed as the perfect material for modern living. It ended up becoming one of history's most infamous killers. Those oven mitts, sold with warmth and trust, literally took people's breath away. Mercury-tipped thermometers for cooking were once the gold standard of precision. Every 1950s kitchen had one. The sleek silver line inside was mesmerizing. It measured everything from candy to roast temperatures, ensuring no recipe failed. Parents marveled at the metallic shine, and kids watched the silver bead race up the tube as if it were alive. No one realized that inside that innocent glimmer was one of the most poisonous substances known to man. In homes across America, small spills turned into invisible clouds of vapor that lingered for hours, even days. But few knew that inside that little glass tube was one of the most toxic substances on Earth. Mercury, if released, could evaporate and poison the air, damaging nerves and organs. Accidents happened more often than you might think. One slip, one crack, and the shiny silver would roll across the counter like liquid metal, fascinating but deadly. Children played with it, adults brushed it off, and homes unknowingly filled with toxic vapor. Eventually, scientists proved what had long been suspected. Even tiny amounts could cause serious harm. The thermometer was replaced by safer tools, but its legacy lingered in the memories of those who grew up watching that silver line dance up and down with the heat. Bleached flour with benzoyl peroxide was sold as the purest, whitest flour money could buy. Housewives loved it. It looked clean, modern, and scientifically improved. The bleaching process made the flour snow white, a symbol of quality and refinement in mid-century kitchens. In an age obsessed with hygiene and purity, white meant progress, and the food industry knew it. Magazines ran full-page ads showing spotless kitchens and immaculate loaves, as if color itself could signal contamination. The reality was far less pristine. Each bag carried traces of industrial chemicals that no one could pronounce. But the same chemical used to bleach the flour was also used in industrial processes, including plastics and cleaning agents. Over time, scientists found that benzoyl peroxide left behind chemical residues that affected digestion and possibly the nervous system. The flour looked perfect but carried unseen consequences. Bakers noticed something too. The bread made with it tasted flat, lifeless, and oddly sterile. By the time regulators banned the practice, America had learned another hard truth. Food does not need to look perfect to be good. Natural color, once seen as old-fashioned, became a mark of authenticity. The ghost white loaves of the 1950s gave way to the golden brown of something real again. Lard-based frostings sold in tins were the unsung stars of post-war baking aisles. Housewives praised them as miracles, ready to spread, shelf-stable, and guaranteed to make cakes look beautiful for days. They were smooth, sweet, and rich with a comforting aroma. For families still recovering from the war, they symbolized abundance, an indulgence that could turn a plain cake into something special. Advertisers sold them with smiling mothers and birthday candles, proof that convenience was the new luxury. Few realized those glossy cakes were hiding spoonfuls of industrial fat processed beyond recognition. But beneath that charm was a mess of unregulated animal fats, processed with unknown chemicals to extend shelf life. Over time, these frostings were found to be dangerously high in cholesterol and trans fats, contributing to heart disease. The same product that crowned birthday cakes with joy was silently clogging arteries across the nation. Once nutritionists connected the dots, those tins vanished from grocery shelves almost overnight. Still, for those who grew up in the 1950s, That sweet, greasy taste brings back the smell of birthdays and bake sales. It was the flavor of a time when no one read ingredient lists and when indulgence came before information. Cereal boxes with actual toys inside were the ultimate treasure hunt for kids. Every morning, siblings fought over who got to dig through the cereal first, hands plunging deep into the box for a plastic ring or tiny car. The toys were part of childhood, as iconic as the cereals themselves. For companies, it was genius marketing. Sell sugar and joy in the same package. Parents saw harmless fun, and kids saw magic. But buried in all that excitement was a small, overlooked danger. Toys small enough to swallow, hidden in the very food they ate. But behind the fun was a danger no one saw coming. Some of the small prizes caused choking incidents, and regulators finally cracked down. What began as clever marketing turned into a public safety issue. The toys disappeared, replaced with paper coupons or codes printed inside the box. Breakfast lost a bit of its magic, replaced by the dull reality of safety regulations. For parents, it was relief. For kids, it was heartbreak. Those little toys might have been risky, but they also represented the wonder of growing up in a world that felt just a little more free. Aerosol cheese in steel cans was the kind of futuristic food that only the 1950s could have dreamed up. It was creamy, convenient, and somehow scientific. All the things that modern America was obsessed with at the time. Housewives marveled at how it could be sprayed directly onto crackers, celery sticks, or even straight into the mouth of a giggling child. It felt like progress you could taste. No knife, no cleanup, no effort. The secret behind the spray was pressure from chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, the same chemicals used in aerosol hairspray and refrigeration. They made the cheese foam perfectly, airy and light, and gave it that signature hiss when you pressed the nozzle. Nobody thought twice about it until scientists in the 1970s revealed that CFCs were eating away at the ozone layer, literally tearing a hole in the atmosphere. What had once been the pride of kitchen technology suddenly became an environmental villain. The cheese itself wasn't the problem. It was what made it spray that turned it into a global issue. Companies scrambled to replace the formula, switching to safer propellants, but the reputation stuck. The phrase "cheese in a can" went from novelty to punchline. For those who lived through its rise, it will always taste like nostalgia and a little bit of guilt. Cottage cheese with rennet from calf stomach was once a wholesome staple that carried a darker story. Back in the 1950s, no one questioned where their food came from or what went into it. The process sounded simple enough. Curdle milk, strain it, and add rennet to thicken the texture. But rennet wasn't just an ingredient. It came from the inner lining of a young calf's stomach, an enzyme extracted during slaughter. To most consumers, it was invisible, an unseen part of the dairy world. For decades, people spooned cottage cheese onto fruit, salads, and toast without realizing the cost behind its creamy texture. When animal rights movements gained traction in the 1970s, rennet production came under fire. It wasn't just the ethics, it was also the contamination risks. Using animal tissue carried the danger of bacteria and disease, especially before stricter processing standards existed. Eventually, scientists developed microbial and plant-based alternatives, and the old method faded quietly into history. Modern cottage cheese tastes the same, but it no longer carries that hidden story of sacrifice. For anyone who remembers the real thing, there's a bittersweet truth in knowing that the innocent foods of the past were often anything but. Olestra fat-free snack foods were supposed to change the world, or at least the waistlines of America. When they hit the shelves in the 1990s, people could not believe it. Potato chips with all the flavor and none of the fat. Ads promised guilt-free indulgence, a revolution in snacking. The secret was Olestra, a synthetic fat molecule that passed through the body undigested. The science seemed sound, the dream flawless, until people started eating it. Within months, complaints poured in. The chips tasted fine, but they came with a terrible side effect: sudden, uncontrollable digestive distress. The phrase "anal leakage" became an unintentional part of pop culture. Consumers were horrified, and late-night comedians had a field day. Regulators eventually forced warning labels on Olestra products, and the once promising miracle faded into embarrassment. For a while, the brand tried to rebrand and reformulate, but the damage was done. People no longer trusted any food that claimed to cheat nature. The shelves emptied, and the name Olestra joined the long list of scientific missteps dressed up as progress. It was the perfect lesson of the modern food age. You can outsmart fat, but not the body. Radithor Energy Water was the drink that literally glowed with danger. Sold as a miracle tonic, it contained radium. Yes, the same radioactive element used in luminous paint and nuclear experiments. In the early part of the 20th century, radioactive meant powerful, not deadly. Companies bottled the promise of vitality and sold it to anyone who wanted to feel younger, stronger, and more alive. By the 1950s, it still lingered on dusty pharmacy shelves and in small-town grocery stores, the last echo of a deadly fad. People swore it cured fatigue, aches, and even impotence. What it actually did was slowly destroy the bones and organs of those who drank it. The most infamous case was that of Eben Byers, a wealthy industrialist who consumed bottles daily until his jaw literally disintegrated. The scandal forced regulators to finally ban all radioactive health products, but Radithor's legend endured. It became the ghost story of the grocery aisle, a reminder of what happens when trust and ignorance collide. In an age obsessed with miracle cures, it stands as one of history's most chilling examples of how far people will go to feel better, even as it kills them from the inside out. Sodium benzoate soft drinks in metal cans were the silent experiment no one asked for. The preservative sodium benzoate was widely used to keep sodas fresh and prevent spoilage. It seemed harmless. But when manufacturers began packaging those sodas in aluminum cans, they created an accidental chemistry experiment. The acid in the soda reacted with both the metal and the preservative, forming trace amounts of benzene, a known carcinogen. The reaction was slow and invisible, but over time it turned sealed cans into ticking health hazards. Consumers had no idea. The drinks tasted the same, fizzy and bright, a staple at picnics and drive-ins. When scientists finally uncovered the problem in the 1980s, it was a public relations nightmare. Companies rushed to change formulas, remove sodium benzoate, and test for safety. But the damage to trust had already been done. It was another case of innovation outpacing caution, of chemistry being used before it was fully understood. The soda cans of the 1950s represented the excitement of a new age, but also its recklessness. They glimmered with promise, even as they carried a danger that no one could see. And just like that, something as innocent as a soft drink became another entry in the long list of modern mistakes. Clackers were two acrylic or glass balls tied to a string and handed to children with no safety warnings and a full green light. You'd hold the middle of the string, swing the balls upward and downward until they collided above and below your hand, producing that iconic clack-clack sound. It looked simple. It sounded addictive. It was also a hazard waiting to happen. The plastic versions could chip. The glass ones could shatter. And if you missed your rhythm, one ball went rogue, swinging at eyebrow height with all the grace of a wrecking ball. Kids practiced for hours, trying to get the timing right, turning every playground into a percussion concert of risk. Parents shrugged. Teachers banned them. Hospitals stocked up on ice packs and gauze. But still, they were cool. Until one clack too many ended in sharp pieces flying through the air. Eventually, safety commissions pulled them off shelves. But back then, one broken pair just meant you were in the market for another. And if that seemed dangerous, wait till you hear about people putting flammable foam containers directly onto gas stoves like it was just another Tuesday. Muscle pants for kids, that was the pitch. Somewhere, a grown-up looked at a child and said, "You know what this kid needs? Pants that scream steroid energy." These were Zubaz-style leggings with wild patterns and stretch material designed to mimic the bodybuilding look of adult gym rats. Except they were made for children. The problem was not just the patterns, which, by the way, included everything from neon zebra stripes to camouflage lightning bolts. It was that kids had no idea how to wear them. The pants were often too tight or too loose, and they came with this weird fake athletic vibe that clashed hard with the Sesame Street lunchboxes. These pants were a hard no. Schools started quietly banning them for being distracting, and parents got tired of explaining to teachers that no, their child was not training for a junior weightlifting championship. They were just victims of 1980s fashion. The trend came and went faster than you could say bicep curl. But speaking of trying too hard to look futuristic, let us talk about the time Atari thought your forehead could play video games. Candy cigarettes marketed to kids showed just how differently the 1970s viewed smoking culture. These chalky, sweet sticks came in boxes that looked exactly like real cigarette packs, complete with brand names and logos. Some even had powdered sugar that puffed out like smoke when you blew on them. Kids mimicked adults by holding them between fingers, lighting them, and pretending to smoke. Parents laughed and took photos, never thinking twice about the message it sent. Playgrounds often turned into smoking lounges, with kids showing off fake packs as if they were grown-ups. Some even argued about which brand tasted better, copying conversations they had overheard from parents. Candy shops displayed them proudly, treating them as just another treat. They were sold right alongside candy bars at every corner store, making them irresistible to children. It was not until much later that society realized how inappropriate it was to encourage kids to play with fake cigarettes. Today, the idea of marketing a candy that mimics smoking seems outrageous, but back then, it was just another example of how normalized smoking was in daily life. Children riding in the front seats of cars was an everyday sight, and often a point of pride. Sitting up front made you feel older, more important. You got to fiddle with the radio, point at road signs, and chat with mom or dad like a co-pilot. No one thought about airbags because there were not any. Booster seats were rare, and height limits did not exist. Some kids were barely out of diapers, sitting inches from the windshield. It was not defiance, it was just convenience. Parents wanted to keep an eye on you, or maybe you just begged until they said yes. You might remember leaning over to see the map or falling asleep with your head against the door. Today, it is illegal in many states for children under a certain age or weight to ride in the front seat. Airbags are now both a safety feature and a reason for strict backseat policies. But back then, the rules were unspoken and the risks were invisible. And if you think sitting up front was bold, try remembering what they used to hand to kids on the 4th of July. Explosives in a paper bag. Mercurochrome was the go-to cure-all for scraped knees, elbow bumps, and mystery cuts. Parents swore by it. Kids feared it. That bright reddish-orange liquid came in a glass bottle with a glass applicator wand, and just one dab left a dramatic stain that lasted for days. But here's the kicker. It contained mercury. Yes, mercury, the same heavy metal now known for its toxic effects. Back then, no one seemed too worried. You'd cry over the sting, get that radioactive-looking splotch on your skin, and be sent back outside with a pat on the head. It looked serious. It felt serious. It was practically a badge of honor. But despite the visual drama, the medical risk was invisible and long-lasting. Mercurochrome was banned in several countries over mercury concerns, yet the smell alone could transport you back to childhood panic and Band-Aid negotiations. But if your parents weren't coating your wounds with mercury, they might have been setting you up with something even more explosive, like a fun chemistry set packed with open flames and no supervision. Because in 1969, Pan American Airlines launched a waiting list for commercial flights to the moon. No joke. People were lining up to get their names on this list. The idea was simple. We made it to the moon, so the next logical step was to sell tickets. Over 90,000 people signed up, excited about the idea of sipping martinis in zero gravity and watching the Earth rise outside their window. And Pan Am treated it like a real thing. They issued membership cards, called it the First Moon Flights Club, and promised that when the day came, they would call. The only problem? There was no plan, no actual timeline, no spaceship. It was a publicity stunt that spiraled out of control. People bought into the dream hard, and Pan Am was not about to correct them. When the company went bankrupt in the 1980s, it had never even started building anything to take people to space. The dream fizzled out, but it proved just how hungry the world was for a taste of the future. And nowhere was that hunger more obvious than in people's homes, where they tried to bring cinema magic to life with a machine the size of a small refrigerator. Lead paint still in homes and toys was one of the hidden dangers of the 1970s. Bright colors coated walls, cribs, and even children's blocks, with no awareness of the long-term risks. Parents proudly painted nurseries in cheerful hues, never realizing the paint chips could be toxic. Kids chewed on windowsills or toy edges without anyone suspecting harm. Lead made paint more durable and vibrant, which is why it was everywhere, in kitchens, schools, and playrooms. Children often scraped walls with toys, breaking off paint chips and putting them in their mouths out of curiosity. Parents swept up the flakes without worrying, treating it like harmless dust. The cheerful colors that brightened homes hid one of the most serious dangers of the decade. It was so common that no one thought twice about it. Later, studies revealed its devastating effects on children's health, especially on brain development. By the end of the decade, regulations began phasing it out, but in the early 1970s, it was still standard. Families now look back in shock, realizing how normal it was to grow up surrounded by something we now consider poison. Home fireworks shows with no permits were the highlight of summer. The neighbors would gather in front yards or cul-de-sacs, lighting fuses with cigarettes or sparklers. The air smelled like gunpowder and grass. You heard the whistle, then the boom, and the sky exploded in flashes of red and gold. Kids helped set them up, dogs barked. Sometimes a rocket would misfire, shoot sideways, or knock over a lawn chair. But it was worth it. It was tradition. Fathers prided themselves on having the loudest bang or the highest sparkle. There were no permits, no fire extinguishers, just buckets of water, and sometimes not even that. If something caught fire, it was a garden hose and a prayer. Injuries happened, but they were shrugged off. Today, setting off fireworks without a permit is illegal in many areas. Even sparklers are restricted in some counties. Public shows are handled by professionals with safety checks and trained crews. But in the 1980s, the 4th of July belonged to the neighborhood. The celebration was loud, chaotic, and often dangerous. And while the fireworks lit up the sky, another dangerous image was lighting up inside moving cars. A toddler perched on a parent's lap behind the wheel. Aquanet's scented hairspray line hit the shelves in 1968, hoping to combine the hold of a hair helmet with the charm of a perfume ad. The brand was already a household name. By then, Aquanet had glued more bouffants in place than any other product on the market. But someone in marketing must have thought, you know what this cloud of chemicals needs? Flowers. So they rolled out a special line of floral-scented versions. There were rose, jasmine, even a spring breeze blend. The idea was to give users a refreshing, elegant aroma while locking their hairstyle in place for hours. But it backfired, fast. The floral notes clashed with every other scent in a person's routine. The smells mixed into something that made elevators unbearable. To make matters worse, the scent faded quickly, leaving behind the signature Aquanet chemical musk, just with a weird dying flower twist. Even die-hard Aquanet fans could not justify it. By the early 1970s, the line quietly disappeared from shelves. Aquanet stuck around, but its foray into fragrance was a short and smelly detour. But if you want a true example of how the 1960s misunderstood its audience, just look at the British bike that tried to win over American teens by shrinking everything they loved. Polystyrene cup noodle warmers were the product of instant gratification and zero caution. Before microwave noodles were common, people would boil water and pour it straight into a foam cup filled with dehydrated soup. But for the especially impatient or inventive, the next step was balancing that foam cup directly onto a gas burner to keep it hot. Polystyrene, in case you're wondering, is highly flammable, as in melts, warps, and ignites at low heat, kind of flammable. So what happened? The bottom would bubble, the sides would sag, and occasionally the whole thing would catch fire, turning dinner into a miniature inferno. The smell of scorched styrofoam was unforgettable and extremely unhealthy, but people kept doing it. Kids copied their parents, placing their cup of noodles just a little too close to the open flame and watching in awe as the foam darkened and shrank. Eventually, warnings were printed, packaging changed, and microwaves saved us from ourselves. But for one hot moment, dinner meant dodging a kitchen fire. And if that was not festive enough, holiday decorating added its own flair, with a snow spray that came with a cloud of toxic cheer. Playground equipment on concrete was one of the most unforgiving features of childhood in the 1970s. Jungle gyms, swings, seesaws, and monkey bars were bolted directly into asphalt or packed dirt. Kids climbed to dizzying heights, swung as far as they could, and when they fell, they hit hard. Scraped knees, bloody elbows, and broken bones were part of the package. Parents brushed it off as kids being kids, and teachers handed out bandages without calling an ambulance. Children dared each other to climb higher or jump farther, often taking risks that ended with painful falls. Merry-go-rounds spun so fast that kids were thrown across the blacktop, tumbling and laughing even through tears. Metal slides burned legs in summer heat, yet kids lined up for another turn. Playgrounds were meant to toughen children up, not cushion them. Metal slides baked in the summer sun, scorching bare legs, while merry-go-rounds spun children so fast they were flung off into the pavement. Today, safety codes require rubber mats, wood chips, and safer equipment, but in the 1970s, it was about adventure and risk. Looking back, it seems shocking that children were left to climb metal towers over concrete with no helmets or padding, but at the time it felt normal and even fun. The Garbage Pail Kids movie is the textbook example of a terrible idea being taken way too seriously. The trading cards were already controversial. Gross-out humor, exaggerated features, bodily functions turned into punchlines. But they were iconic. So naturally, someone decided to turn them into a full-length feature film. And it was a mess. The characters were played by little people in horrifying animatronic masks that barely moved, giving every scene a nightmarish vibe. The plot? A vague attempt at a coming-of-age story with elements of science fiction and slapstick comedy, all of it soaked in questionable effects and even worse acting. Even die-hard fans of the cards walked out of theaters feeling like they had just lost a piece of their childhood. Critics called it one of the worst films ever made, and audiences agreed. It tanked at the box office, vanished from theaters, and was quietly swept under the rug. The only thing this movie managed to accomplish was proving that not all nostalgia belongs on the big screen. But if you think that was a bitter taste, just wait until we talk about a candy bar that tried to be classy and ended up at the bottom of the vending machine. Candy cigarettes marketed to children were everywhere, in toy aisles, convenience stores, and party favors. They came in thin white boxes designed to look just like real cigarette packs. The candies themselves were chalky white sticks, sometimes with red tips to mimic a burning ember. You held them between your fingers like the grown-ups did. You exhaled imaginary smoke. Some even puffed out a sugar dust cloud when you blew through them. It was playful, innocent, and a little rebellious. Parents bought them without hesitation. Adults laughed when kids imitated their smoking habits. But behind the joke was something darker, an early conditioning that said cigarettes were cool, normal, expected. By the time health campaigns ramped up and smoking was linked to cancer in the public consciousness, the backlash began. Candy cigarettes became symbols of how early the tobacco industry's influence started. Today, they are banned or heavily restricted in many places. Major manufacturers stopped making them altogether. But for those who grew up in the 1980s, they are a memory of imitation that turned, for many, into addiction. And if what kids were putting in their mouths raised concerns, so did what they were playing with, because some of it was covered in poison paint, sandwiched in that glamorized smoking without a hint of warning. And just when you thought that was the low point, someone thought it would be funny to actually sell a toy that involved broken glass in a bag. Yes, seriously. The bag of glass toy kit was one of those ideas that sounds like a joke, because it kind of was, but somehow ended up on actual store shelves. Inspired by a sketch from a comedy show, it became a bizarre reality thanks to novelty companies that took the joke way too far. Inside the package? A small, clear bag filled with sharp-edged plastic shards that looked, and in some cases felt, a whole lot like real broken glass. Some versions were labeled as safe plastic, but others? Not so much. The idea was that kids could pretend to play with shattered glass as a prank or just for laughs. But what could possibly go wrong, right? Tiny cuts, choking hazards, or just the sheer confusion of teaching kids that handling jagged shards was entertainment. Parents were either horrified or totally unfazed, depending on their sense of humor. The product didn't last long, and while this prank kit was short-lived, plenty of long-term household items were just as risky, like hair dryers with zero insulation and a plug that sparked like a lightning bolt near the sink. So let us talk about Telex car phones, the early kind. These were supposed to be the peak of convenience, your own private phone line inside your car. Sounds slick, right? Except using one felt like yelling into a toaster that barely heard you. The equipment alone took up half your trunk, with clunky transceivers and roof antennas that made your car look like a spy van. You would pick up the phone, wait for a signal, and then shout into the handset while everyone in traffic stared at you like you were calling from the moon. Reception? Spotty on the best of days. Dropouts were constant, and unless you were in the middle of a major city, the odds of actually getting through were slim to none. Add to that the price tag, which could run higher than the car itself, and it becomes pretty clear why Telex car phones never caught on. Not to mention, you had zero privacy. People in the next lane could hear your entire conversation. It was supposed to be the future, but it felt more like a prank. Still, if we are talking about future flops, nothing tops the brief moment in time where Hertz thought regular folks might fly to work. Collecting and playing with lead-painted toys was not just common, it was colorful. Bright red fire trucks, yellow duck pull toys, green building blocks, all coated in lead-based paint that chipped with time and clung to tiny fingers. Kids chewed on them, babies teethed on them. Nobody thought twice. Lead paint made colors pop and finishes last. It was used in toy trains, doll houses, lunchboxes, and even cribs. But as scientists and doctors began linking lead exposure to cognitive delays, behavioral problems, and even organ damage, the danger became harder to ignore. Still, many households in the 1980s were filled with toys made before stricter regulations took hold. You might remember that sweet metallic taste from licking a painted truck or the smell of an old wooden toy chest. It was part of playtime, but under the surface, those bright colors came with a cost. Today, toy safety is rigorously tested, and lead limits are strictly enforced. But back then, the warnings were distant, the labels unclear, and the risks silent. And if the toys were risky, so were the neighborhood traditions, like launching fireworks right from your own backyard. No permits, no fire marshal, just matches and luck. Back before Halloween became a yearly anxiety fest, taking unmarked candy from a neighbor was just how the night worked. You rang a doorbell, yelled, "Trick or treat," and got handed whatever someone had lying around. Loose jelly beans? Great. Homemade fudge and wax paper? Even better. The idea that candy needed to be sealed and tamper-proof had not fully caught on yet. No one was worried about needles or poison. Your biggest fear was getting a box of raisins. Parents did not comb through your haul under a flashlight. They just told you not to eat it all at once. The neighbor handing out popcorn balls or wrapped caramels was not suspicious. They were the cool house. Trust was the currency of the neighborhood, and if someone put effort into a treat, you respected it. Now, we wrap everything in layers of packaging and double-check labels like candy is a security threat. And after all that sugar buzz, you already knew where the real party was, under a disco ball, skates on, and lyrics your parents probably should have listened to more closely. Aurora slot cars were a must-have for every young speedster in the 1960s. The bright colors, snappy bodies, and twisting plastic tracks brought the thrill of racing right into the basement. You'd plug in the controller, slam the trigger, and watch your tiny car whip around the corners like it was chasing the Indy 500. But that thrill came with some unintended side effects. The motors inside those early models ran hot. Too hot. After a few laps, some would overheat and melt the chassis, leaving a smoking puddle where your prized vehicle once sat. Others sparked at random, shooting little arcs of electricity that looked cool, until they scorched your hand. And since the cars were often left plugged in for hours, the plastic casings warped, cracked, or fused with the tracks. Some even caught fire. Parents started noticing the smell first, that sharp, burnt plastic scent that lingered like a warning. Eventually, complaints piled up and multiple models were recalled. But for kids, those slot cars were irresistible. Speed came first, safety came second, or not at all. And if melting race cars weren't shocking enough, just wait until you remember what dads used to do on the roof with a metal rod during a thunderstorm. BB guns and pellet guns, treated as toys, reflected a time when safety concerns were far less strict. Kids received them as birthday presents or bought them with allowance money, then ran into backyards or fields to play wars without goggles or supervision. The guns looked real, fired small projectiles and caused plenty of injuries, but that never slowed their popularity. Children lined up cans on fences, tested their aim on bottles, and sometimes even shot at each other in mock battles. Bruises, welts, and chipped windows were common, but few parents saw them as serious problems. Instead, BB guns were viewed as a training step before hunting or using real firearms. Parents often shrugged it off as part of childhood, seeing it as a step between toy cap guns and real hunting rifles. Children learned to aim, to shoot at cans or bottles, and unfortunately, sometimes at each other. It was dangerous, but it was also seen as normal, even character building. Today, strict regulations, bright safety markings, and bans on certain models make them far different from what they were. In the 1970s, though, BB guns were simply toys, symbols of a looser and riskier time. Fireworks for kids were not just available, they were encouraged. You walked into a gas station, handed over a few dollars, and left with a brown paper bag filled with firecrackers, bottle rockets, and Roman candles. No ID check, no warning label. You lit them with matches, your fingers trembling with excitement. Sometimes you held them too long, sometimes they fizzled out, other times they exploded in your hand. But that was part of the thrill. Neighborhoods erupted with smoke and booms. Adults watched from lawn chairs. Kids ran barefoot across driveways, shrieking with glee and barely avoiding burns. There were no goggles, no supervision, and almost no laws to stop it. Today, most states restrict firework sales to adults. Certain types are banned entirely, and child safety campaigns have all but erased the image of kids with sparklers and pocket lighters. But in the 1980s, fireworks were a childhood staple, dangerous, loud, and unforgettable. The risk was part of the fun, just like cracking open a cold beer on a public beach once felt like a harmless way to enjoy the sunshine before open container laws shut that down too. Home hair dryers in the 1960s looked like they came straight from a beauty salon, but without any of the safety checks. These early models had bulky hoods or handheld nozzles, often with thick cords that frayed faster than a worn shoelace. You'd plug them into the wall, perch near the bathroom sink, and hope for the best. No ground wires, no insulation. Just you, your wet hair, and a live current a sneeze away from disaster. The metal casing got hot. The motors sparked occasionally. And heaven help you if your fingers were damp. Water plus faulty wiring? That hairdo could turn into a fireworks show. Yet people trusted them because that sleek salon look felt worth the risk. Back then, it was just another day in the name of glamour. But if electricity was playing with fire, what we put directly on wounds wasn't much better, especially when it came in a bright red bottle with a Mercury surprise. It looked like something straight out of a haunted dollhouse and somehow got greenlit as a beauty product. The Rejuvenique face mask promised younger, firmer skin through electrical muscle stimulation, which is a fancy way of saying it zapped your face with little shocks. Advertised by a former soap opera star, the mask wrapped around your head like a plastic exoskeleton and turned your facial routine into something that felt like a scene from a horror film. The idea was that the stimulation would tone your face like a gym tones your body, but customers mostly reported mild burns, numbness, and the distinct feeling that they had made a terrible mistake. Despite airing on television with the enthusiasm of a late-night miracle cure, it flopped hard. It was the kind of product that felt less like a beauty tool and more like a sci-fi movie prop that somehow escaped the set. Still, you had to admire the ambition. If you could survive the Rejuvenique, surely you could survive anything the 1980s had to throw at you. And as it turns out, that next throw was straight at the kids, because someone thought gym fashion should start in elementary school. If these forbidden favorites from the 1950s stirred up your curiosity or your appetite for nostalgia, tell us which one you'd risk trying. Drop a like to keep these lost stories alive and subscribe so you never miss another taste of America's hidden past.